Mm, gotcha. Look at that shiny new computer. Shannon got a new computer and it's been like updating for the last 12 hours. So as soon as she figures whatever's happening out here, we'll start this slideshow. Okay, so we're talking about like the history of, it's kind of like the history of the word cancer, really, which evolved from a long, long time ago. And I was just going to do a talk about it, but then I thought it would be nice to see the timeline of everything. So this is going to start from ancient Egypt and Hippocrates to coffee enemas, cellular pathology, microenvironment science, and then how we go from where we had choice to more of medical control back to sovereignty. So this is this next slide that's coming up, so you can do it, is this is like the timeline at a glance. So all of this started, I mean, back in the 1500s. That's really when we had the Egyptian medical, they had the different, ways of writing into stone and all that stuff. And we have pictures of all this stuff in here. And then 460 BC is when Hippocrates came into the game. He was like the original doctor. Celsus and Galen. Celsus is somebody that had a big impact on medicine. And Galen, with the word Latin or the word cancer, went from the Greek word into a Latin word that was cancer, and then humoral medicine, like fluid medicine or body fluids. We'll talk about that. 500 to 1500 AD, Middle Ages, cleansing and constitutional care. 1500 to 1800 is more anatomy and hydrotherapy, local lesions and how some of the things shifted. And then in the 1850s, coffee enemas, Virchow and terrain meats, like cellular chain or more into cellular pathology. And then the 1900s to 2000 is where oncology standardized like the war language of changing medicine entirely. And then we have the 2000s to today with the microenvironment, and hopefully sovereignty systems are starting to return, which I think we're starting to see more of. So it's like it's a shift, really. So in the ancient view, disease as imbalance within a whole terrain was the way that they thought. The modern view is disease is classified as cellular pathology, and our emerging bridge, cells exist within systems, and systems influence cells. And now we're working on reclaiming responsibility for the conditions that support health so that we have a healthy terrain so these things cannot exist. So this is just kind of a sum. So we're going to go through it. So next slide, Shannon. Thank you. So this right here is the Egyptian medical text. So it was an actual medical document. This is one of the times of the earliest recorded medical enemas and medical papyri. The ancient Egypt medicine preserved written formulas, remedies, and clinical observations. They would record digestive, intestinal, skin, respiratory, and surgical concerns. Enemas and clysters were a part of ancient medical cleansing practices. Elimination was not seen as optional. It was part of maintaining balance in the body. So their question was like, or their way of looking at it is what must be removed for our health to be restored. And it's kind of the same for us. Like coffee enemas are not, they're not optional. They're a must. So cleansing, removal, drainage, purification, and bell care was huge back in ancient Egypt. And if we could read that, that would be great. But basically what it says is what's there in the text, which is it's pretty neat. So this is Hippocrates. I always want to call him hippopotamus. We'll call him Hippo for short. So cancer began as a description, not a modern diagnosis. So he started to use the word because of how the radiating vessels or the encysted infections actually resembled crab legs. So in Greek, karkinos means crab. Carcinoma, which is very interesting because noma, melanoma, all the tumors end with a noma. but noma was crab-like growth. So it had nothing to do with anything other than they connected a lot of things to astrology back in the day, and Cancer is the crab. And so when these growths would start to happen in their body, and these people that were not upkeeping their terrain and their health of moving, the humoral medicine pathology out of the body, they would start to see these radiating vessels, the encysted infection starting to appear as the crab legs, and they would extend from like where the central mass or the central, mass, wherever it was in the body, these things would start to extend and look like crab legs. So it was interpreted as internal imbalance, not an external enemy, which is very interesting. So Cancer was associated with excess black bile within the body fluids in medicine. So his question always was, why did this body create the conditions for disease? Let's go to the next one. So these are the different four humors, which is funny. It's like the four fluids. The original terrain model that he would work behind, black bile was the terrain language for hardening, coldness, dryness, and stagnation. It's very similar to Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. So humor, the blood, the qualities of the blood, if they were warm and moist, they were connected to the heart and the liver. And if there was excess, it made heat and inflammation in the body. And then we have phlegm, cold and moist, connected to the lungs and the brain, which obviously makes sense. And then there was congestion, which then was sluggishness. So think of like brain fog, as I have it right now. Just trying to find that word. Yellow bile meant warm and dry. Organ associated was the gallbladder. And in people, like think about people, if they haven't pooped or, if that like the liver's congested, they're waking up between 1 and 3, they're usually irritable, and kind of agitated and hard to deal with. And it's funny because I've had a lot of people say, oh yeah, so-and-so started this protocol and they're, I have a hair in my mouth, they're much easier to get along with because we're starting to move these fluids so this terrain is not becoming stagnant. There's no more black bile. So black bile here, cold and dry, connected to the spleen and the earth, which is interesting. And it created hardening, stagnation, and melancholy in these people's lives. So black bile symbolized thickened or degraded fluids, which meant you had poor elimination, which led to coldness and loss of vitality. Dryness then was loss of flow. Long-standing emotional heaviness started to occur. That's a huge point for this. And we're going to come back to this. Long-standing emotional heaviness, because when things are stagnant in the body, this is where emotions can heavily start to impact your health. Okay, let's go next. That little thing right there that looks like an ice pick is actually one of the first enema tools that they used to shove it in the hole. So enema, this is the ancient terrain, health required movement. Enemas belong to a larger elimination-centered philosophy. So the principle was simple. Life moves, disease develops where movement is lost. You ever heard use it or lose it? It's kind of the same thing. Food must move, fluids must move, blood must move, waste must move. Even emotions were believed to require expression and release. So this, as I said, is one of the, they called them clisters back in the day. And that was like a thing, you'd pull it out and you'd fire it in the hole. So the common terrain tools was diet, fasting, baths, exercise, and herbal plunging, along with enemas back in the day to keep the terrain clean. If these practices were not considered cancer treatments, because that's not what he did back then. They were part of an older belief that maintaining flow and elimination helped preserve balance before disease became visible. So their ways of life was all prevention, whereas that's what we're working towards again here. Okay, I think I hit everything there. Yeah, let's move on. Okay, so this guy, Celsus and Galen. So this is 25 BCE to 216 CE. The crab metaphor becomes the Latin word cancer. So they took a Greek philosophy basically, and now they've changed it into a Latin word that means cancer, and humoral medicine is now cemented, so it's gone. So this fella, Celsus, took carcinos, the Greek word, and turned it into the Latin word cancer. So Roman medical writer translated Greek into Latin, Latin for crab, preserved Greek medical teachings. So this is when the shift started to happen. And then we have Galen, this lovely fellow with the pointy nose on the right. He still expanded humoral medicine, focusing on the black bile theory. He linked cancer with chronic black bile accumulation. So they're starting to move out of prevention and into more of a medical outlook. He favored the purgatives over surgery, which the purgatives were all the things we just talked about, and tried to dominate Western medicine for more than 1,000 years with these beliefs. The primary focus was restoring balance within the organism, whereas these other guys trying to push the whole pathology way of thinking. So 500 to 1500 CE, this is the Middle Ages. There's that cute little cluster down there again. So for nearly 1,000 years, physicians largely inherited Greek and Roman frameworks. Cancer remained associated with humoral imbalance, especially black bile. Disease was still viewed through constitution, age, digestion, season, temperament, and stagnation. So this is very similar to like Chinese medicine. We always talk about the constitution of somebody, and you bring all the pieces in to like create this puzzle. So the common approaches included herbal purging, sweating, baths, bloodletting. This is when they would do like, what do they call it? The leeches on the skin to suck the blood. They would even do like wet cupping, enemas, cautery. So sometimes they would burn things to stop it, or if there was tissue that was not looking well, you know, they'd go in and they'd burn it, kind of like they do with things on your skin now. And they used very limited surgery. Pathology did not advance significantly because the body was not routinely studied internally. So they didn't have the things that, you know, started to come much later. So their question was always, what has become stagnant? Which today we could ask the same thing. What on your body has become stagnant? Well, I know my left trap's pretty stagnant, and now it's, you know, sending communication up the neck that there's a problem. So the body was interpreted through movement, retention, depletion, and balance. Okay, let's go to the next. So here's where anatomy starts to change, 1500 to 1800. We go from systemic imbalance more towards localized tissue disease. So instead of looking at the whole terrain, now they're just focusing on, we have this problem right here. Human dissection and autopsy became very common. Anatomical understanding accelerated. Organs and lesions could be studied after death, and cancer began to be described more as a localized tissue problem. So what remained, hydrotherapy, bowel care, mineral waters, fasting, cleansing, and enemas remained to be a part of the medical culture. Terrain thinking and emerging anatomical medicine overlapped for centuries, and the older question of drainage and elimination did not disappear immediately. But this is when cancer is becoming a thing in the tissue, but they haven't gotten into like cellular pathology yet. So this is kind of when they kind of started to merge in together. All right. 1815 to 1900 is when the coffee animals, maybe something if you shoved an animal up there full of coffee. Coffee enemas entered medical literature. Newer than enemas, but connected to the older elimination model. So it was still this little fantastic tool here. Enemas were not ancient at this time, but the coffee enemas become newer. In fact, they used to put all kinds of things. They'd put milk and they'd put teas and they'd put like turpentine and I actually have a book with some of the older coffee enemas they did, and they'd put anything up there. It was very interesting. They appear primarily in the late 19th and early 20th century medical literature and references. They were used historically for bowel evacuation and digestive stimulation, not as a standalone cure, which even today it shouldn't be considered, well, depending on what you're trying to work on. This terrain interpretations support the body's ability to remove what no longer serves it. And I think we see that every day with our own enemas. In old medical language, restore movement, drainage, bile flow, and elimination. I think we can all kind of relate to this. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. So here's this fantastic looking fella. 1858, Rudolf Virchow and the Cellular Revolution. All diseases are diseases of the cells. So this is when pathology really changed how medicine starts to understand disease. So clearly before, terrain, constitution, fluids of the body, elimination, and finding balance. After this, when this fella comes in, now it's all about cells, pathology, diagnosis, classification, and mechanism. So this is where we see a major shift. Disease becomes something to identify microscopically, classify, and now we treat it. So we've completely shifted from what's wrong with the terrain, what's out of balance, how can we, support the body, because a well-supported body can protect itself. But that was like not in the game anymore. Now it's like, how do we help you? Okay, let's move on. 1900 to 1950. I'm going to pause for a second. I don't know if Lisa's on here, but she literally just sent me this thing on Facebook from this doctor who said, if you continue to go get scans, they will always have a treatment for you. They will always find something. And they, by their medical terms, they have to treat you because you can sue them if they don't. So if you get the scan, they're going to find something. Absolutely. And if they don't treat you, they're not doing their job. So there will always be a treatment, which I thought was pretty interesting coming from that doctor's mouth. Anyway, modern medicine emerges 1900 to 1950. Microscopic work improves, cancer classifications start to expand, surgery becomes extremely dominant, radiation starts to develop, and pathology becomes the authority. What faded away? Constitutional medicine, hydrotherapy, fasting clinics, routine bowel care practices, enemas as standard medical tools, and terrain-centered preventive language all starts to fade away. The system became better at naming and treating visible disease, but less fluent in the language of upstream terrain. So, and I'm putting, because this is all recorded and, again, all of this is my opinions and my research and what I find. And I'm not saying modern medicine is wrong, because if I broke my arm, I'd head over to the emergency room so they could fix it up for me. Or if I was on GLP and my vagina started to drop, I'd probably go find a surgeon to help me with that. So I don't think it's all wrong. However, modern medicine does become incomplete when system context has completely begun to be forgotten, in my opinion. Let's carry on. So 1950 to 2000, the war on cancer era. Our dominant focus now has totally shifted. We detect it, we diagnose it, find the staging, the surgery, the chemotherapy, the radiation, and the genetic mutation models. That is the protocols right there. The dominant question now is, how do we eliminate cancer? When I think, what happened to the terrain for it to get to this point? That's the difference in what's going on. So the battle, and it's so hard, and I don't go in and see oncologists, but I think that has to be addressed, and we're not able to get those answers in today's world. And over here, the battle language helped organize treatment, but it also made many people feel like their body was the enemy. And if anybody's ever felt terrified of their own body, which I have, that emotional baggage that you carry around with just that alone can make whatever infection in the body 100 times worse than it actually is. And I even believe some of the things that happened as we were, when we were children, or in a marriage, or any traumatic experience that we're hanging on to, can absolutely keep you in a state of dis-ease in the body until you release it. And I believe I'm living proof of that, personally. So this is, my whole thing now is, my book I'm writing is called From Survival to Sovereignty, because I was in a state of survival for a really, really long time, until I decided that I'm not relying on anybody for the answers anymore, and I have to do this work myself. And I do believe that making that choice is probably what saved my life, and releasing all the emotional baggage that was going on with my life as well. So I think we need to keep that in the forefront of our brains as we heal our bodies. Okay, let's carry on. The microenvironment returns. Modern science starts asking terrain-like questions in cellular language, 2000 to the present. Coffee enemas are no longer around. They were taken out of the medical books 1974. They're gone. I believe it was removed in 1973, because 72 it's in there, 74 it's gone. Modern researchers are studying tumor microenvironments. immune regulation, metabolism, inflammation, hypoxia versus oxygen availability, extracellular matrix, cellular communication, stress physiology, and epigenetics. And it's always going to come back to the modern, ancient question, modern vocabulary. Cells do not exist in isolation. They have to exist within an environment. And what is that environment? Hippocrates was not like, he had many opinions in his research, and I don't know that he was right about everything. However, I think he was on a very good path that was completely wiped out. His opinions were wiped out in his studies. All right, let's keep going. Why enemas and the terrain tools faded. So the older model was terrain support, constitution, elimination, hydrotherapy, preventive cleansing, and regulation before diagnosis. Our newer model is laboratory diagnostics, surgery, pharmaceuticals, radiation, standardized disease codes, and treatments after diagnosis. Our result, coffee enemas and many elimination therapies left mainstream medical education. They remained mostly in naturopathic tradition and integrative communities. Today, even in some of our, integrative things, they are quite controversial and should be discussed carefully and thoroughly with good knowledge of them. And then a useful question to ask is, what did we gain through modern medicine, and what older questions about prevention, elimination, and regulation do we need to remember? Which is a very good question. And I think having conversation with doctors, these things should be brought up as well. Like, yes, you understand you gave me a diagnosis, but how did I get there? There's nobody's talking about how we got there. They just want to do the protocol and treat it. But how did we get there, and what happens afterwards if we go that route? Okay, let's keep going. This is the one that was all over the place. So at some point, every healing journey becomes personal responsibility. It has to. The doctor's not going to eat for you. They're not going to sleep for you. And there's not a supplement that's going to heal all the wounds that we refuse to face. And in America, we like to numb a lot of things. We go through experiences where we would just rather numb it away than face it at all. And that's not going to help. We have to face everything that's occurring in our life, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, or traumatic. And there's not a protocol that can do that inner work for us. We can, but we also cannot avoid it because we will not heal. So we have to start becoming responsible for everything, and the willingness to ask, what are the habits? What are the beliefs, the relationships, emotions, exposures, and the patterns that are no longer serving this body? And we actually have to do the work to face them. Let's keep going. Okay, so the prevention conversation becomes practical, emotional, and spiritual. We have to nourish the body, we have to eliminate the body, and we need to move the body. We got to regulate with sleep, vagal tone, and stress response. We got to release the grief, the shame, the anger, and the old stories, and lose the identities. And we got to clean up our environments, what you're eating, what you're drinking, the products that you're using, and especially the relationships you're having in your life. And don't outsource your knowing. Like, study and learn what you need to know. There was a situation, somebody asked something, I don't know, or maybe it was somebody asked, like, well, do I have to be a part of this coaching and education, or can I just do the medicine? No, because you need to understand what's going on in your body. You need to understand what you're taking. And if somebody says, what are you doing? I would like you to have a 2-sentence answer for them. I'm taking responsibility for my health. I'm getting back my identity and my personal power, because there's nobody out there that's going to do it for me. And that's going to start to hit here a lot harder than just like, I don't know, I'm just like taking these pills. I don't even really know what they are, right? So taking responsibility, and what conditions can I create that allow my health to thrive? And I think understanding more of what we're doing is a huge part of that. And that's why we have this whole coaching and education program. Here, let's keep moving on before I go into my rants. We're doing good. It's been about 30 minutes. All right. So the big idea. Ancient medicine asked, why did disease emerge? And honestly, if I sit back and look at my past, I know exactly why it emerged. I know 100% why it emerged. I wasn't allowed to fart. I wasn't allowed to say that I had to go to the bathroom. I've told you all the story about when I finally left. I farted for like 3 months straight. My body was releasing finally, right? So I know why my disease emerged. But in modern medicine, all they wanted to tell me is what was present. Oh, you have cervical cancer. Well, how did I get there? There wasn't anything. Did I have an infection when I was younger? Did I have a vaginal STD? Did I have this? There was no questions as to what happened. It was just, you have a disease and this is present. We need to treat it. So as people, or as myself, I should have said, what conditions can I create for my health to thrive? What conditions do I need to change? Which I ended up changing. So our future really is not our cells or our terrain. It's really understanding both and reclaiming our role in the terrain we actually need to live inside. Asking yourself, would I allow myself, or would I allow my child to eat the way I'm eating? Because we're always meanest to ourselves. Like, I think we can all say we've been victims of that. And eventually we learn and grow. But would you allow your most loved person to eat or not exercise or not have the water to nourish the body? Or is it like, especially as moms, we're always like, here's the strawberries, eat the strawberries. And you're like, I don't even need a strawberry. I haven't eaten a strawberry in like 6 months. So I'm always shoving it down other people's throats. You know what I mean? So we have to learn to treat ourselves the same way that we treat the people around us, providing that they're the lovely people we expect them to be. Okay, let's carry on. This might be the last one. Oh, these are just the notes of where I pulled different information from. We don't really need to look at that. So anyway, that's all I have for you tonight. I did have more on here, but we don't need to have that recorded. But I do think we need to start addressing certain things and taking responsibility for everything. And a lot of it is the emotional baggage. A lot of it is the labels. Like when in not really, well, Chinese medicine too, we were always looking, at the balance of the body. And in natural medicine school, there was not a day that we were not reminded, you absolutely cannot say a diagnosis. And this is where I think a lot of people's problems emotionally stick around. Because every time somebody says, I have Lyme, does anybody say that? Or I have cancer, or I have this autoimmune disease. You're attaching yourself to it like you own it. And I want to know the last time that you said to anybody, my flu, instead of I have the flu, which is normally what everybody says, my flu. Has anybody ever said that? And then suddenly it goes away. Do you know what I'm saying? Don't own your labels. They're not your labels. You don't have to take that on because a lot of the times they're not even correct. So lose the labels, address the symptoms. And number one, start addressing what is the emotion that is tied to the label they gave me.